In physics, thermodynamics dictates that systems move towards disorder. Drop ink into a glass of water, and the particles inevitably diffuse until the system reaches equilibrium. The entropy strictly increases. Generative artificial intelligence operates by asking a mathematically precise question. What if we could run that physical process in reverse? The core challenge in image generation is mapping an intractable distribution, like the millions of highly structured pixels that make up a photograph, to a simple, unstructured noise distribution that a computer can easily sample from. This diagram illustrates how we build that map using a forward Markov process. We take a highly structured image and sequentially inject Gaussian noise over discrete time steps. Step by step, the structure degrades until all that remains is pure isotropic static. Reversing this destructive process requires learning how to navigate back up the gradient of the data distribution. We must calculate a time-varying vector field that points each pixel away from pure noise and toward a state of higher data likelihood. Executing this reversal requires three components. First, a mathematical objective to optimize. Second, a neural network architecture capable of processing spatial data. And finally, a mechanism to control the semantic output of the system. Generative adversarial networks, or GANs, rely on a zero-sum game between two competing models, a dynamic that often collapses into a state where the generator produces a single repeating pattern or fails to converge entirely. Because a diffusion model instead follows a fixed, predefined noising trajectory, it transforms the generation task into a sequence of simple, independent denoising problems. This avoids the delicate balance required by adversarial training, preventing the mode collapse that previously limited generative research. To reverse the noise, we must first mathematically define how it is added. The forward Markov chain injects random Gaussian noise incrementally, usually over 1,000 distinct steps. The exact magnitude of noise injected at any given moment is strictly controlled by a variant schedule, denoted as beta t. This schedule defines the precise rate of degradation from a clear image into static. Here we see the exploding variance problem. If we continually add noise to a dataset without scaling down the original pixel values, the distribution expands outward infinitely. The variance of the system explodes, rendering the math completely intractable. By applying a variance-preserving schedule, the original signal is fractionally scaled down exactly as the noise is added. The final corrupted state now strictly converges to a standard normal distribution, bounding the math within a stable, calculable radius. Simulating 1,000 sequential steps of physics for every single image in a training dataset would take an impossible amount of compute. To bypass this bottleneck, researchers apply a crucial mathematical shortcut known as the reparameterization trick. Because the sum of two Gaussians is still a Gaussian, the sequential steps can be collapsed. By calculating the cumulative product of the variance schedule, denoted as alpha bar t, we can directly compute any noisy state, xt. It becomes a strict linear combination of the original image and a scaled Gaussian noise tensor. The network no longer needs to simulate the entire physics sequence. It can instantly sample a random time step, generate the exact noise profile for that specific moment, and immediately begin learning. This single algebraic shortcut makes training a diffusion model computationally feasible. With the forward process established, we define our generative objective. Maximize the log likelihood of our data by approximating the true intractable posterior distribution. This equation block represents the evidence lower bound, or E-elbow. Because we cannot compute the exact probability of the data directly, we use variational inference to construct this proxy objective, breaking the problem down into distinct Kullback-Leibler divergence terms. Injecting the original clean data into the reverse process resolves the complexity of the true posterior. While we cannot reverse the noise without knowing the destination, the distribution becomes mathematically tractable the moment it is conditioned on the original image, x0. Because we are matching two Gaussian distributions, the complex probability matching of the KL divergence collapses entirely. The objective mathematically reduces to simply minimizing the L2 distance between the means of those distributions. This yields the final loss function. During training, the neural network does not attempt to predict the clean image pixels. It strictly predicts the exact noise tensor, epsilon, that was injected at time step t. Trying to predict a highly complex photorealistic image directly from heavy static results in massive variance and poor gradients. By predicting the noise instead, the target becomes an isotropic Gaussian, a stable, low-variance objective that allows the neural network to rapidly and reliably converge. To solve this loss function, the system requires a neural network capable of predicting noise across thousands of pixels simultaneously. We rely on the U-Net architecture because it strictly maintains the identical dimensional geometry between its input and output tensors. This animated diagram tracks a 3D tensor passing through the downsampling path of a U-Net. As the tensor moves through convolutional layers, it shrinks in spatial dimensions but grows in depth, compressing the raw pixels to extract deep, low-frequency semantic features. As the tensor moves up the upsampling path, it expands back to its original resolution. However, the severe compression at the bottleneck causes a massive loss of high-frequency pixel data. The resulting edges are blurry, and the fine structural details are completely destroyed. Residual connections solve this. By mapping raw data directly from the early downsampling layers across to the late upsampling layers, the network instantly restores sharp, high-frequency structural details to the final output tensor. But the U-Net has a critical flaw. It shares weights across the entire generative loop. If it receives a noisy image, it possesses no inherent way to know if it is operating at time step 999 near pure noise, or time step 1 near a clean image. To cure this time blindness, engineers use positional embeddings. Using sine and cosine functions, they generate high-dimensional frequency representations of the current time step t and inject them directly into the network blocks. These time embeddings condition the network's convolutions, altering their behavior on the fly. At high values of t, the network applies coarse structural denoising. At low values of t, the network shifts to fine detailed texture refinement. By combining the spatial awareness of the residual connections with the temporal awareness of the positional embeddings, the architecture establishes a single, time-conditioned vector field capable of navigating the entire generative trajectory. An unconditional diffusion model can flawlessly reverse entropy, but it will only generate random samples from the global dataset. Practical utility requires localized, prompt-driven sampling. We need a way to steer the math. Look at this correlation matrix from a model known as CLIP. It projects both vision and language into a shared 512-dimensional latent space. It trains by maximizing cosine similarity between matching image text pairs on the diagonal and minimizing similarity of mismatched pairs everywhere else. This shared latent space acts as a rigid mathematical coordinate system where semantics map directly to physical pixel patterns. Subtracting the vector for a person without a hat from a person with a hat resolves perfectly to the exact text vector for the word hat. We extract these dense text embeddings and inject them into the U-Net through cross-attention layers. The text vector acts as an additional conditioning variable, biasing the noise predictions during inference. However, pure conditioning often fails. When evaluating the vector field, the model naturally prioritizes minimizing its overall loss by steering toward the safe average center of the training dataset, rather than strictly following the specific constructions of the prompt. To actively amplify the text prompt's influence and override the dataset mean, we apply a mathematical technique called classifier-free guidance, or CFG. Here we see a 2D spiral manifold representing our data distribution. During inference, we calculate the baseline unconditional prediction. This gray vector arrow originates from a noisy coordinate and points directly toward the dense, safe center mass of the data. Next, we calculate the text-conditioned prediction. This yellow vector originates from the exact same coordinate, but it points slightly off-center, pulled toward the specific target class dictated by the CLIP embedding. CFG executes a specific vector arithmetic. We subtract the gray unconditional vector from the yellow conditioned vector to isolate the exact direction of the text prompt. We multiply that difference by a scale factor and add it back. This yields a massive green vector that completely overpowers the baseline trajectory and locks precisely onto the target geometry. CFG intentionally pushes the denoising trajectory away from safe dataset averages. By scaling up the isolated semantic vector, the system actively sacrifices sample diversity to achieve extreme, uncompromising prompt adherence. We can now execute the complete generation stack. A user submits a text prompt, which is projected through CLIP to form a strict semantic coordinate. A tensor of pure isotropic Gaussian noise enters the U-Net. The network evaluates the spatial data, conditioned simultaneously by the positional time embedding and the text coordinate. This split screen captures the iterative inference loop in real time. The UNet predicts the noise scale. Classifier-free guidance amplifies the semantic trajectory. A fraction of the noise is subtracted, and the Python loop iterates. Step by step, the entropy is systematically reversed until time equals 0. Traditional models rely very heavily on stochasticity. They actually inject small amounts of random Gaussian noise back into the tensor at every step of generation to prevent the math from collapsing into a blurry average. Modern architectures, however, use a framework called flow matching. They replace the random walk of a stochastic differential equation with the rigid determinism of an ordinary differential equation. Treating the learned vector field as a deterministic ODE allows algorithms to take larger adaptive mathematical steps. This reduces the generation time from 1,000 exhaustive neural network passes down to fewer than 10. Uniting non-equilibrium thermodynamics with contrastive representation learning allows for the systematic reconstruction of structured data from chaos. By aligning high-dimensional text embeddings with the learned vector field of a diffusion process, these models translate human language into a sequence of deterministic pixel operations.